Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the program. It's Danny Haiphong. We are in a hotel in Zhejiang province in China. I am with Margaret Kimberley, back again. It's been a while, Margaret. Good to be back with you, and it's good to spend time here in China. How are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you. I've already told you, I'll tell everybody else that we both live in New York City and haven't seen each other for a couple of years. So we meet up in China.
Yeah.
But it's great to be part of this delegation. It really is.
Yes, so we have been traveling throughout China, which we will get to. But first, let's begin with what's been happening. This has happened to me a few times. I go away, I travel abroad. I was in Vietnam in October, and then, of course, October 7th occurred. And now we are in the throes of an escalating situation. Iran retaliated and responded to Israel's attack on its embassy in Syria, which killed several military personnel. The attack from Iran was historic in many ways. The first time Iran has done such a thing. Penetrated the Iron Dome many times, despite the U.S. and Israel's attempt to say otherwise. And of course, this comes in a broader situation, which I think is important to talk about, since I think this is going to be an ongoing development. The broader situation is that there's still a genocide happening in Gaza, and there is much resistance to it, especially in the region. And so I'm wondering what your impressions of this has been, as you know, we've both been covering these U.S. wars, these escalating wars for so long. I mean, how do you see this situation? Where does it fit?
It's, I have to say that it's one of the reasons it's uniquely bad is that Biden is president right now. We have a president who's very limited person, frankly, limited intellectually, limited in his worldview, always a staunch Zionist. His first response after October 7th was to go to Israel, kiss Netanyahu's ring, and give him a blank check. And 35,000, at least 35,000 deaths later, Israel felt emboldened. I believe they did it because the U.S. Chose to abstain from the ceasefire resolution at the UN. Now about a month ago. Israel is this weird sort of client state, which also tells the patron state what to do, and in its anger and in its ability to act with impunity, lashed out, bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus. And just a reminder, consulates and embassies are not to be touched. There is an international convention, I believe it's the Vienna Convention, which gives protection to embassies and consulates, violation of international law, of international norms, and in daring Iran to attack. And also, Israel has wanted to instigate a war with Iran for years. They want to get rid of, neutralize Iran, this country in the region, which potentially could have the power, the ability to do it great harm. And they've gotten there, well, so far, they tried it under Trump. But I don't know if he stopped it. It's unclear to me. But this is something they've wanted, was for the U.S. to side with them and attack Iran, because Israel can't do it by itself. And that was their gambit, that they would dare Iran to do something, the U.S. would jump in on their side, and they could get this long sought-after war with Iran. Instead, the U.S., I don't know, they got fed up to some degree. So they actually, it's understood that the U.S. and Iran talked about which targets Iran would be allowed to hit. So they didn't get exactly what they wanted. But so there, regardless of the specifics of what's going on, we still have this pattern of Israel being like the 51st state in the region, but being problematic even to its sponsor nation, and using the power it has politically and economically in this country to try to get its way. And having a president like Biden, who is, in addition to his ideological problems, his being a staunch Zionist, is one of the reasons Obama chose him as his running mate, by the way, and his weakness as a person and as a president has just exacerbated this process that's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, it's certainly true that this relationship between the United States and Israel is unique in the sense, and you even had Zelensky crying about it in Ukraine, because Zelensky has been trying to occupy this role, where Zelensky tries to tell the United States what to do, tries to tell NATO what to do, wants more money, wants more arms in order to continue the war against Russia, which is failing. But the United States will not treat Zelensky, NATO won't treat Zelensky like they do Israel. And you have, yes, this curious situation where the United States, many people will say, okay, well, the United States has the ability to stop what's going on in Gaza. It has the ability, in retrospect, in theory, to cease what Israel is doing in the region, to de-escalate if Biden were to choose to assert that diplomatic pressure, but yet it doesn't happen. Actually, the opposite is true, where Israel publicly and consistently pressures the Biden administration through various channels, the media, as well as back channels, in order to get what it wants. And it is such a unique thing to watch, because often it looks from the outside that it's the United States that has, at least when it comes to the weapons, when it comes to the relationship with Israel, that it should have the upper hand, but it really does not appear to be that way. Israel has used all of its leverage as this kind of a military satellite, this ability to assert its own interests, because it knows how valuable it is to the United States. And in my estimation, that is why someone like Netanyahu, I don't believe he's particularly, a lot of liberals will say in the U.S., oh, he's just pro-Trump, that's why he does these things. Actually, I believe Netanyahu is a really shrewd political player who has, for many years, decades even, maneuvered both the Israeli political establishment and system as well as the U.S. to get where he is. And I think that continues to be the case.
I think so, too. I also think, they've tried to also, in a way, in a phony sort of way, throw Netanyahu under the bus. It's not, making everything his fault. Well, it's time for him to step aside. They'll leak these stories. And, Biden's mad at Netanyahu, and he called him an asshole, and, all kinds of things, which I think are phony. Phony because I always got the feeling that the back channels were telling Netanyahu, we have to say this, so don't be too offended by this little charade we're going through. That it is a charade. And then you have people like Chuck Schumer, Senator Schumer, Senate leader, saying it's time for him to step down. Personalizing this is a problem. Yes, Netanyahu's a horrible, evil man. I'm not going to say he isn't, but the problem is Zionism is horrible and evil. And if Netanyahu did step down, there's nothing about Israel that would change. There's nothing about the U.S. relationship with Israel that would change. So I feel it's easy to join in condemnation of Netanyahu, but we have to depersonalize. The issue is not just this person. The issue is the Zionism itself, this relationship with the U.S. that, goes back, how old is it? Was it 75 years to the establishment of the State of Israel? So I don't think it's a good idea to talk about Netanyahu himself all that much.
Yeah, and what seems to be really critical about this moment, too, is how it reflects, you talked about Biden. I mean, I think Biden is a personification of this. The fact that the United States, especially in its position in the world, has been in precipitous decline. I mean, with what has just happened in the Middle East, with what Iran did, I call it historic in many ways because it has been this kind of almost like this intense escalation of a development that I think doesn't get enough attention, which is the resistance to Israel, the resistance to the United States in the region has been gradually reaching a very high point. Iran being able to penetrate the Iron Dome and send the United States, send Israel into kind of a frenzy. What do we do? Respond now, don't respond now. They're going back and forth about it. Biden is making trade-offs about it, or trying to, Rafah for Iran, these kind of desperate moves. And then you also have just overall, it's not just Iran, it's like the entire region. You have Yemen, Ansar Allah, firing drones and missiles over at Israeli ports. You have in Iraq, similar thing happening. You have Hezbollah to the north of Israel engaged in intense fighting, evacuating the entire part of the settler colony. So it's not just Iran here, and what it seems like is it represents this expression of a decline in the U.S.'s position in the world. It is unable to control these circumstances. It appears the overall trajectory is unfavorable overall to the United States.
Oh, sure it is. It's hard to say that the U.S. has the military power to continue doing the same thing for a long time. But as you point out, the trajectory is one of decline. That the U.S. This insistence on dominating, there are other countries. I always found it odd. People say Israel is America's only friend in the region. No, it isn't. Some of those Arab states are Egypt, Jordan. Those are U.S. client states.
Saudi Arabia,
yes.
Even still, yeah.
That idea persists, and I think it will continue to. So while the trajectory is clear, and while we can see it for the foreseeable future, the U.S. can keep doing what it's doing. There's no country that has stepped in to stop the killing, the slaughter of the people of Gaza. South Africa did, to its great credit, in bringing charges of genocide against Israel at the International Court of Justice. But actually moving in to stop what the U.S. And Israel are doing, no country has dared to do it, because in challenging the U.S. directly, it's bringing a lot of trouble onto any country that should choose to do so. So yes, there is evidence of the decline, which causes the U.S. to make these choices that are ultimately bad for itself. So yes, that is true, but the U.S. is still a very powerful country and still has the ability to continue to carry out these policies and even worse. I mean, look at yes, it is true. The U.S. could say no more weapons for Israel or do something, but then Israel will, who knows what they can do. They bombed Iran's embassy to try to start a war. So it's not clear how powerful it is. I mean, if in order to really end this really poisonous relationship with Israel, the U.S. would have to take a different tack altogether and give up this urge to dominate, give up the desire for, give up imperialism, in short, which I don't see happening, unfortunately. So while there is decline, while that decline does cause the U.S. to take actions which create bigger problems for itself, because imperialism is still the basis for U.S. decision making around the world. I think, unfortunately, that means we will see more of the same.
Mm. Yeah, it certainly doesn't appear that the United States is going to let up. What does seem apparent is that Israel has taken this massive step, this massive acceleration of an ongoing process of Palestinian displacement and now genocide. And that massive step has set into motion a series of events, especially regionally, but really globally too, which have troubled the United States in so many ways. I don't believe the United States necessarily wanted, in the middle of, as you mentioned Biden earlier, in the middle of a very fast approaching election year, I don't think they were calculating that there would need to be so much military attention to West Asia. I don't believe that was the calculation, but alas, here we are. And we are in this changing world, Margaret. I know that you talk about the United States' role in the world, empire, war, and in these areas from Middle East to Ukraine to we're in China now, to what the United States is doing in the Asia Pacific and its policies toward China. I mean, we're seeing this trend of the United States trying to hold on to and expand its dominance, its geopolitical position, all parts of what that means. While at the same time, as it does that, there is obviously this exposure of the limits, the failures, the weaknesses of this empire. And I'm wondering if you want to talk about that at whatever level you feel like is.
Yeah, it's difficult because I mentioned South Africa's taking a case to the International Court of Justice. So what does the United States do? Decide they were fearful that the ICJ would come out and say, yes, Israel committed genocide. Now, they did say it was plausible, which to me means you did it. And they ordered Israel to stop killing people, but they were really afraid that the ICJ would say, yes, Israel is committing genocide. So what did they do? The same day that the decision came down, they joined Israel in accusing the UN relief agency, UNRWA, of being controlled by Hamas, or having even a handful of staff having a Hamas connection and cutting off aid to the UNRWA, and just like Donald Trump did. The fascist, the guy we're supposed to vote for Biden to keep Trump out of office, but Biden is doing exactly what Trump did. So that's an example of how this really sick relationship works. That of the United States aiding and abetting genocide, of being on Israel's side. It's Israel is doing what the U.S. wants it to do. Now, there may be certain things they don't want. They may want to use certain language. There could be some differences, right. But at the end of the day, it's U.S. policy too. Right. And I think that's something that we cannot forget. It's the U.S. is as guilty of genocide, is guilty of committing war crimes as Israel is.
Oh, yes. And this is true in all proxy wars, all indirect wars that the United States engages in, which it, at this moment, prefers. If we look at Ukraine, everything that is happening with regard to the Ukrainian government is directed, is logistically navigated and controlled by U.S. intelligence and various other U.S.-related and NATO-related forces. The same goes with Israel. There is nothing that Israel does that the United States is not knowledgeable about. There is all sorts of coordination, even with this Iran strike. Iran was, as you said, communicating through mediators. Iran has said through its foreign ministry that it will not do that again if there's a retaliation from Israel. It was doing this in order to control the situation because, unlike Israel and unlike the United States, Iran truly doesn't want a wider war. It just felt compelled to respond. So, yes, the United States not only has a hand in, but is really the purveyor of these conflicts. And I'm wondering maybe your last word on, we're in China, and we're talking a lot about forces in the world that are moving in a different direction, whether it's Iran, whether it's the resistance forces in West Asia, whether we're talking about Russia, because that's the target of the Ukraine crisis, we're talking about China. Maybe if you wanted to talk about this change that's happening in the world, which is, I think, maybe not fully the cause of why the United States does what it does, but certainly is a huge factor in why the United States is behaving and why NATO and why the rest of this imperial apparatus is behaving in the way it is.
Well, you know, ever since, I think you have to go back 30 years to the fall of the Soviet Union, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I was actually an adult, alive, and unlike you. I was alive and an adult at the time, and I remember naively thinking people talked about a peace dividend. It's like, well, if there's no more Soviet Union, we don't need all the money for defense. And well, the people in Washington said, oh, hooray, no more Soviet Union, we can do what we want. The world is our oyster. The U.S. can control events. The U.S. can do whatever it wants. And that was true for a time, but it's not true anymore. And however, this truth has not caught up with the people who are putting the entire world at risk. In all of the places we've mentioned, but China is an economic superpower, but a country is not going to just be an economic superpower. It's going to then have influence diplomatically, thank goodness. And so you have these countries that were enemies like Saudi Arabia and Iran now actually talking. That's because of China. Yeah. That was an effort that China brokered. And this is a good thing for to have a multipolar world, to not allow one country to determine events. That's all to the good. So, we see China working behind the scenes. China tried to, Russia and Ukraine were in peace talks shortly after the special military operation began. The U.S. and UK scuttled that. China made efforts at some kind of agreement. The U.S. said no to that. And they're still saying no, except now they're asking for a pause or something. And Russia's about to win, which is why they're asking for a pause. So now they're saying, nope, not anymore. So we have all of these issues, and Russia and China are closer than, thanks to the Biden administration, well, successive administrations, but things have come to a head in recent years, are closer than they've ever been before. So what does Biden do? He called Xi Jinping. I'm sorry, it's not funny, but, well, it is kind of funny. He called Xi Jinping.
Biden is a little funny.
And says to him, you can't help Russia anymore. You can't help them with the weaponry in Ukraine. I don't know that Russia needs China's military help in Ukraine. But this is typical fantasy foreign policy. Yeah. After Biden called Xi a dictator and then couldn't get him to take a call, and then they had this back and forth diplomacy to patch things up after other people did all this work, and then Biden repeats and calls him a dictator again. But so that's where that's why it's so important for China to play this role as an independent power that works in its own interest, that works to help other countries, that the U.S. seems to be hell-bent on destroying. So I really do believe that, given the chance, of course, that would mean the U.S. being a completely different country, we could see China. I mean, we already do see it. China shaping the world in a better way, not acting as this hegemon, not wanting to have 800 military bases around the world, not to do all of these things that the U.S., an imperialist nation, does.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.